Welcome back. I finished the shear clamp just in time to get my car in the garage before the big snowfall. I'm quite pleased with the final result, but progress was slowed by some work travel, a lot of planning, significant iteration, and even more work travel. In fact, even before I could start shaping the shear clamp, I had a lot of airplane time to think through the process. Now that I have all three layers bonded together, I need to shape them appropriate to this lamination. And I'm going to go from that point there, hit all of these inside edges and mark that off. And I need to do it all the way along the boat. And what you'll see is that that shape changes quite a bit as you go down. Here in the center of the boat, what is this, between like frames 8 and 9, it's pretty flat. There's a lot to be taken off here at frames 2 and 3, and then it gets pretty flat here again at the front of the boat. So I'm going to use the power planer to start working on this. Here at the back of the boat, to make sure I don't go too far on the top outer edge, I've put a red colored pencil, so that will help me make sure I don't power plane too far. And then when I move to the front of the boat, things start going the opposite way. I put the red colored pencil on the bottom here, or which will be the top, so that when I sand off or I power plane this off, I don't take off that edge. So here we go. Depending on how much material I wanted to remove, I adjusted the depth anywhere from 1/16 to 1/32 of an inch. Now you can see what the shear clamp looks like as I've beveled it from the back all the way to the front. Let me talk to you about these notches that I drew on here. Dan Lee reached out to me and said, hey, be careful cutting these out as you marked them, because if you didn't get it right and you go too deep, you're gonna have a problem. So I think what I'm gonna do is use these notches as guides. Now, we know that the shear clamp is 1 3/4 inches tall, therefore notching these out parallel to the top of the boat, notching them 1.5 inches deep, we're pretty safe in doing that. But how far this goes in, there's so much curvature here that, the question is, how far should you take this in? If I notch it all the way to that line and it turns out it's too deep, well, then I messed up. So what I think I'm gonna do is notch these out right at the 1.5 inch vertical height, but maybe leave 1/4 to 1/2 inch extra, on the inside of my, left to right notch, so that I can make sure that everything's correct, and I'll have to edge these in a little bit. So that is my plan now. At this point in the project, I had a significant delay as I had some work travel in Asia. By the time I returned home, I had some new ideas on how I was going to notch the frames to accept the shear clamp. Welcome back. I have been traveling an awful lot and haven't had a chance to work on Temptress here for a few weeks. What I have done now is I have the shear clamp shaped, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to
start notching each of the frames to fit the shaped shear clamp in. And Dan Lee said, hey, be a little bit careful because by the time you shape this, you'll have a better idea of how far you need to notch this. And now I've done this, and I know I want this about a 1/4 inch over there, and the shear clamp is 1 3/4 inches at the top here going across. And I actually only notched it by 1 inch. So my backside is not notched deep enough, and the front side is very likely, well, as you can see, if you take that all the way up, the front side's notched too far. So I'm gonna have to rework on how I do this. My first step I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start with the front and work my way back, and as hopefully you can see the way I have the camera angled, is I need to now cut the shear clamp to the point there so that it lines up with the front of the boat. Once I line that up, then I'll be able to measure and notch each of these going backwards. So I just wanted to show you up close that I need to cut this to run and butt right into the stem. And obviously I can't get it all the way in there now, so I'm just gonna offset it so that that parallel line goes right to the point. Then when that's in, I'm gonna line that point right up to the front of the stem, and I'm gonna work my way backward. Trying to do here, I'm just trying to get this angle right, but as I bring this up, it's coming at an angle because I haven't notched those frames. Okay, now that I have the stem approximately notched into the right position, I'm gonna work my way back and try to see if I can notch the frames progressively backwards to the correct height. Now, the first thing to make sure is that these notches are 1.5 inches deep. The shear clamp is 1 3/4 inches thick, and I want it to overhang the top of the boat by 1/4 inch. So I definitely want to notch that 1.5 inches. So I know that's the right height. The hard one to figure out is how far in do you notch it. On the back side of this, if I measure, it is 1 3/4 inches. So the shear clamp on this top side, aft side, is 1 3/4 inches wide. And I want it to overhang by
1/4 inch.
So what I need to do is make sure this notch here is 1.5 inches deep. And it is currently marked at 1 inch. So I have the notch on this back side. So then if I can align this to the notch, I should be able to see where to notch the front of frame 1. That was not ideal. So I've got the front notched fairly well. Here on frame 2, I've measured that the shear clamp is 1 3/4 inches wide on the aft side of frame 1. So therefore I know when I move up here, I need this to go in 1.5 inches, so I get a 1/4 inch overhang. So I drew a new line here that I need to get this shear clamp aligned to. It's just not as easy as you'd like to believe. Why? Oh, there. Okay, so I have that aligned there. And now that that is aligned, wow, I can see that I actually need to cut a whole lot more off of the inside of the notching out frame 1. That is a pretty steep notch. I'm gonna go line up frames 2 and 3 just to make sure this is correct. So I've lined up the stem and I've lined up the shear clamp on the aft side of frame 2. And I'll just take a photo of it so you can see what I'm talking about. Now here on the aft side of frame 3, what I want you to see, I'm on frame 2 here, I'm sorry. I took a photo of frame 1 and here I'm on frame 2. What I want you to see is that the width of the top of this shear clamp parallel to the frame is 1 inch. And I want this shear clamp to overhang the side of this frame by 1/4 inch. So I need to notch this way by 3/4 of an inch. And as we said before, this should be 1.5 inches. So if I come under here, 1.5 inches is actually up here. This notch needs to be parallel up here. And since the top of the shear clamp was 1 inch and I want a 1/4 inch overhang, I need to be coming in 3/4 of an inch. I actually need to notch it right there. So then this should move over. And once I move this over and align it, then I can align the front side. I'm just trying to give you a view from the front of the stem over here to frame 1, swinging on back to frame 2, frame 3, frame 4, frame 5, frame 6. I've got the aft side of these frames pretty good. But when you look at my lines, here at frame 6, the forward side lines pretty well. Frame 5, pretty good. I start to lose it a little bit here at frame 4. I don't want to quite cut that deep. Same is true here at frame 3. Frame 2, may have to cut a little bit deeper. And then at frame 1, cut a little bit deeper even to keep the shape of the shear clamp. So I'm gonna go ahead and mark the forward side of these frames, and then I'm gonna start cutting. Okay, here we are on the forward side of frame 1. And it makes sense that these need a lot more shaping than the other frames. It goes right there. And just gonna double check that that's 1.5 inches, and it is. So when I cut, I'm gonna come short of the line just to kind of ease things in. Let's move over here to frame 2, and this one is surprisingly accurate. First thing, make sure it's 1.5 inches up, and it is. Come right to the edge of where that one is. It's pretty close, actually. So I'm pretty close.
And now we cut out the notches.
Okay, I'm feeling good about getting to that line there. And then I'm gonna go to the 1.5 inch mark. But connecting these, well, I had the camera shut off, but I've got the notch on frame 1 cut. I cut it a little bit, I guess Dan would say, proud of where I think it's supposed to go. I'm gonna do that on frames 2, 3, and a few of them on down, maybe all the way to frame 6. just so I can see how this fits in and decide how much adjustment needs to be made.
On frame 3, there's a silicon bronze screw in the way, so rather than ruin my saw, I'll use the oscillating tool.
Okay, so now I just try to pop it in.
Next, I work on the front to back angle of the notches.
Okay. So now I'm going to come in and I'm going to start using my oscillating tool to cut out to the back of the frame so I can start pushing this in a little bit tighter. And you can see I can close up that gap. It's a whole lot better.
Next, I work on the transom.
Now that's looking better. So I got this one in and it becomes more clear where the next ones need to start coming in. Okay, so I'm feeling pretty good about how this is all gonna line up. I've got the transom, all this gets shaved off so it's a flat part here. You know, I didn't go all the way in on frame 13, but you know, I got a nice 1/4 inch gap, so only frames 13 and frames 10 seem to have a bigger gap than I like. And I'm comfortable with where I'm at as far as the in and out of this shear clamp. The next thing I'm gonna work on here is as you look at it vertically, at the back of the boat, it starts curving back up. The shear clamp coming in, I need to go ahead and shim up or trim up the angle of the top side here. So. Yeah, that's way better. Okay, I'm feeling pretty good here. I'm now ready to bond the shear clamp. And you can see here, I put a screw. I'm gonna use a silicon bronze screw to help it up here at the stem. And we got the shear clamp dry clamped in along the way. And back here at the transom, I will use a combination of a screw and clamp to hold it together. Okay, so now I'm going to attempt to bond the shear clamp to the frames. And because there's so many of them, what I'm doing is I'm leaving the back half clamped. I'm going to separate this out. I'm going to put a coat of unthickened epoxy and then thickened epoxy, and then screw it on, clamp it together, and keep working my way down. So I'll start with the unthickened epoxy here. Then I'll come in and let's do the thickened epoxy. Now that I've got those in place, I'm going to try to start clamping and pulling together. Now I'm going to repeat the process and start taking things off down the backside.
Let's take one last look at the shear clamp as it is clamped up to cure overnight. And then at the finished shear clamp the next morning. And now I'm off to snow globe. Till next time, cheers.